Hello, everybody. It's nice to be back. And Flying High, that's the name of our show, as you probably already know. And today we're going to fly really high because I have a special gentleman here that attended Chabot at one time. And he really interested me when I talked to him over the phone. So, right off the bat, I would like to introduce our gentleman here. Give us your name and
Tom Lorentzen.
Say it again.
Tom Lorentzen.
Lorentzen. That in itself sounds pretty ethical, old-time. Lorentzen?
It's a Scandinavian name, Norwegian in origin. And, so, Scandinavian heritage, an American born.
Okay. Now, I'm really interested in the things you've been doing in your life because you kind of go by different things that you don't plan that far ahead sometimes, and lo and behold, there you are. Tell us a little bit about what transpired when you were here at Chabot, and especially when you had Murtis as one of your...
Well, Chabot College was one of the best things that ever happened in my life. I think in the high school years, like some people, you get a little bit lost in terms of your focus. And by chance, I ended up going to Chabot College. It was 1963. It was located in San Leandro then, adjacent to the old Pacific High, which is no longer there. And I went there and things started to get better. And then the second semester at Chabot College, I had two classes back to back from a teacher named Barbara Mertes, who's deceased now.
Right.
And English 1A and Speech 1A. And she was the teacher that perhaps most changed me and improved my life. And
Wow.
And she was a real inspiration, not only to me, but I think to hundreds of other people.
Yeah, and I taught with her at the time I was here, and I remember Barbara Mertis really well. She was just a fine person to know. Now, in what kind of ways did she influence you? What happened that...
Well, when she stood in front of the class, and again, that second semester at Chabot, I had her for back-to-back classes, English 1A and then Speech 1A. And like a lot of people, you're 17, 18 years old, you're nervous about getting up before a class or anybody to speak. My knees would shake, and she worked with kids to get some confidence. But the English 1A class before then, so in between classes one day, as the English 1A class would leave, and I'd sit there and wait the 10 minutes for the Speech 2A class or 1A class to come in, she asked me a question. And she said, Tom, have you given any thought about what to do for a career? And I said, no. I was 18 years old. I had no idea. And she said, I have a suggestion for you. And I said, you do? And I said, what would that be? And she said, have you ever thought about becoming a writer? And I said, a writer? I said, no. I said, why would you say that? And she said, without any doubt, she said, in 3 English 1A classes I have, you're the best writer I have. And I said, I am. And she said, yes, you are. I think you have an ability with language, and you should consider using that as a career. And I said, well, thank you. But she was such an inspirational teacher, and because she identified a skill, I guess, that I had that I didn't know, but as it turns out, I realized later my parents, both my mother and dad, had a good skill with language. But if she said I could write, then I, Tom Lorentzen, must be able to write. And that inspired me, and I used the writing skill, which I didn't know I had until she identified it, to go all the way through Chabot and then Cal State, Hayward, now California State University, East Bay. And then later, I went back to graduate school at the University of Nevada at Reno because of a conversation with Barbara.
Wow.
And got my master's degree up there. So twice she changed my life for the better. And she was a truly, but it wasn't only me. She did that again with hundreds of people and maybe even thousands. She was a tremendous teacher, a tremendous person.
Yeah. And I think a teacher like you say, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, because even the 100 you might influence it, then you go on to influence others by the fact that she helped you in your ways. You know what I'm saying?
You're absolutely correct. And I've thought about it over the years of what she did.
Yeah.
Originally with that basically a 2-minute conversation to identify that I may have a talent that I didn't know I had and to use it for a career and a life. Now, I never earned my living as a writer, but I did work on my writing skills and everything, and I've used it throughout my career. And so I look at that and try and see ways in which I can identify a skill that somebody else has and encourage them to use that skill to improve their lives. So yes, I try and carry on the tradition that Barbara Murdy's did for me.
And the thing that inspired me when I talked to you over the phone to begin with, maybe just like Barbara Murdy saw you writing, and I saw you as being able to really come out and speak and do your thing, say your thing, and what have you. And this is why I really invited you here, and I'm so happy to have you, by the way. So anyway, let's go on with you. The second time Barbara Murdy influenced you was because?
Well, I had bumped into her. I was living in Reno, Nevada, and actually I was having lunch across the street from Chabot here on Hesperian Boulevard with an old friend. And bumped into Barbara there.
Wow.
And at the time, I was taking some classes at the University of Nevada at Reno, but I was not going full-time.
Yeah.
And she asked me what I was doing, and I was having a good time. I was actually working in a casino at the time. And she had a little frown on her face, but then when she had that little frown, I said, well, I've been taking classes at the university, and I'm thinking about going back there. And as it turned out, she called up there, talked to the chair of the political science department, and advocated that I be entered in there, and I was, and I graduated the master's. So she did it twice. She changed my life. And then years later, when I came out to take care of my mother when she was ill and dying, I looked up Barbara, and she just started looking after me again. But again, she did that for all kinds of people. Just a truly exceptional person.
Yeah, she sure was.
So I was a true beneficiary, but there were many other people that she gifted with her own life.
And you had a couple of other teachers here at Chabot that you had that. How did that go with them?
I did. There was I've been in and out of the political world and the governmental world my whole life. There was a history professor named Ray Stephenson, I believe.
Stephenson?
Yes, I believe so. And he taught history. And I had him for 2 classes. And he was a good teacher, and he rejected a term paper I did one time.
Wow.
That he felt was just not well done. And you're bothered. Your professor says, I can't give you a passing grade on this, but he said, I want you to pick another subject and write another subject. And by rejecting that paper, he helped me understand more how to write a really good term paper. And so I started a whole new subject, wrote it. But I learned from him about trying to understand history better and write clearly and think as clearly as possible. So he was a secondary teacher that influenced me, but he was a very good professor too, a very good teacher here.
He was an older dude too at the time.
He used to run around the track all the time, and I'd see him running there, and I'd say, my God, he's so old, but I think he was younger than I am now. I'm 73.
Well, I remember him too, the older fellow. I thought, well, this guy is something else too, And I run track myself. I don't know if you knew this. At my age, I'm the fastest sprinter in the world for the 50, the 100, and 200 at age 86.
Holy cow. I didn't know that.
I do that, yeah. And I have a lot of fun running. I play basketball here every other day too. And at 86, people wonder, what are you doing out there? In fact, when Sarkar and I met, he said, gee, we got to get you on film. So he did a lot of filming of me playing basketball, doing my tricks and what have you.
Oh, fantastic. I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, well, now
I'm into walking now. So
you want to interview me now?
Yes, absolutely.
But Sarkar is a great guy, and he follows up on stuff and so forth. So he was a good man to work with.
Sure, absolutely, yes.
So, now, you had another teacher here that kind of influenced you too, right, besides Stephenson?
Well, Barbara Murdy's and Stephenson, and then actually some of the PE teachers were good, but I also had there was an economics teacher. His name was Whalen, W-H-A-L-E-N.
Yeah, I remember.
I had so little grasp of economics. I remember he would teach every day. Back then they wore coats and ties, and they were much well-dressed, shall I say, when they came to teach at Chabot. And he made me start to try and understand economics. And so I look at him as the third teacher, and there were the main 3. Barbara Murdy's number 1, Ray Stephenson, then Mr. Whalen. And he helped me to start to wonder about economics, what's this all about? And it was a fascinating subject, and he made me develop an appreciation for the subject.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. In following up on your world and what you did and so forth now, I mentioned to you earlier about what I do. World peace is one of the things. You said, whoa, that's a big subject. How are you going to tackle that? And let's talk about that a little bit, because world peace. What does that mean to you first, and then I'll talk more about it. Because
Well, I think it's a dream, and
a dream, yeah.
yeah, and it's something certainly everybody always wishes we could achieve, but
Yeah.
we never do. And after Chabot here, actually, in Cal State, I ended up becoming mentored by an individual that you might remember, Eric Hoffer, the San Francisco longshoreman writer. And Hoffer wrote a classic book called The True Believer about the rise of the mass movements behind Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. And I had many visits, 50 to 60, with Hoffer over about a 4-year period of time.
Yeah.
So he influenced me a lot, not only in thinking, trying to analyze things, dissect things, but he also was an excellent writer, but yet he never went to school beyond the age of 7.
Wow.
He was a hobo and a migrant farm worker and
Yeah.
panned for gold, and he got the Presidential Medal of Freedom before he died. And so in trying to understand human nature, like the subject of how did Hitler happen? How did communism, fascism? And Hoffer really mentored me a lot about dissecting things. And so world peace is something certainly we all dream for.
Wish for, yeah.
But at the same time, I've come to the conclusion through my lifetime that we humans, it's a debatable subject, have 3 fundamental things that motivates us: our interests, our beliefs, and hopes. World peace is a hope. But interests are emotion, and interests can conflict with one another. Individual interests, and I might have mentioned to you.
Yeah.
An interesting question is, more people have been killed, Americans, by wars in the 20th century, we're now in the 21st, or by automobiles. Automobiles have killed more people. And yet we use automobiles as a form of emancipation, to go places and do things, see family and friends, go to work, etc. But they're terrible killing machines.
Yeah.
And so the conflict that happens out of a good purpose to help us move better, but the conflict happens, and there's a lot of tragic accidents. I've had 2 accidents. Unfortunately, I wasn't seriously hurt. But so world peace is, we all want peace, but it's I hate to say it. I believe it's a dream. It's an objective. But you try and minimize conflict, because conflict's a very natural thing in life.
Yeah. Well, one of the things now kind of follows with my world peace thing. I help sponsor getting wheelchairs to people. I think 550 one place, 550 another. Australia was one of them, and Mexico was the other one. I had an interesting thing when I was in Mexico. I ran into a guy and I had a wheelchair that had helped him get there. I said, wow. Anyway, he was putting some tape here and there, so I went over and I bought some stuff for him and so forth. And now I'm trying to get him to Cuba and Afghanistan, and each to 550. And I help facilitate this. Right now, it's pretty good with Afghanistan, because Afghanistan's trying to bring in 20 students, 10 boys, 10 girls, next year. And so we're working on that. So in my world peace thing, and then you're right, that's a big thing. It's a hope that we all hope for in the right way, we hope. And I want to get it going in colleges where it's who, why, what, where, when, instead of setting up a curriculum. This is what you teach, just who? Well, people here in Iran, Iraq, or in New York, or whatever, but reaching out. And it's a step of a long-running game that you're talking about. And anyway, that's one step.
Well, in political science, which I majored in, but it was really history, was my passion. There was a very outstanding professor. He was at the University of Chicago, I believe, Hans Morgenthau. I heard him speak up at Cal State Hayward back 50 years ago now. He's long since gone. But he summarized, he wrote a classic book called Politics Among Nations. And he summed up the behavior of nations in one sentence, which was very profound, that nations pursue their interests in terms of power. It can be economic power, it can be moral power, it can be military power, it can be whatever.
Yeah.
But through Morgenthau and Hoffer and other people, made me realize how hard it is to modernize. We take progress and modernization in our lifetime sort of for granted. It's a pretty new thing in the human experience. As Hoffer used to tell me, that George Washington went to his inauguration the same way the Romans did, by horse. So there was very little change really in the human experience, and very slow progress, so to speak, until the convergence of so to speak, technology, which really came with the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And how do you uplift, and how do you develop a nation, number one, modernize it, and it's not easy. So like, do we all want peace? Yes, but at the same time, how do you, like what China's been going through, they tried through communism to try and modernize their country, and it didn't work well. So they end up freeing up more of the economics, less of the politics, but they've made more economic progress now. But progress is not an easy thing, and peace is a dream, and someday maybe we might get lucky and have more of it. But progress and modernization are very difficult things to go through.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you say, it's difficult there because you say world peace, that's a huge thing to look at, and taking steps at a time. And on all these accidents, you're not going to eliminate automobiles out of this world. They're going to be going no matter what. In fact, it's kind of crazy now, self-driving automobiles that you read about. That scares me, thinking of that. What's somebody going in the crosswalk, they watch out for him, but somebody else is over here. It's just mind-boggling to me on what can happen there,
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
Well, without naming any nations, one nation, say, because water is such a precious resource for everything.
Yeah.
And with a river or access to water may exist more in one nation than another nation. So then it's in the interest of the other nation to try and get access to the water or to the minerals or the resources so they can modernize and progress their country. And this is where conflict comes about. It's trying to improve things creates conflict in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So it's noble, and we all wish for world peace, but I think we have to sadly recognize that conflict is inherent in the human experience, and do our best from there and hope for the best.
Yeah, there's a lot of toes that we step on no matter what we're doing, that just you can't help it sometimes. But when I've talked about this I've been to Russia, Australia, Japan, Germany. I've traveled all over the world, actually. Great. And in these places, what I did, in Russia, for instance, it's interesting, I had a lady who was my translator there. And afterwards, she's saying, I'm so surprised they talked about this that they usually don't talk about, home situations, their sexual problems, their own personal problems with others and so forth. But the thing that I got out of it is that we are more alike than different. Even when the Russians are there, we think, dun, dun, dun. And the Germans, especially the Hitlerized crap that went on, And still there, I found a lot of people really fun to talk with. And more the same than different.
Yeah.
When you get down to guts level.
No, that's true. And in fact, a friend of mine that I went through high school with in Castro Valley, he and his wife, I visited with them recently, and just in the last few years, they rode their motorcycles through Russia, through other parts of that region of the world, and they found what you found is, the commonality of ourselves.
Yeah.
John Steinbeck, I might have mentioned, I've been doing some
who's that guy?
a little bit of theater where I'm portraying John Steinbeck. That's where I grew this
Yeah,
goatee.
I want to hear more of that.
But Steinbeck had in his book, Travels with Charlie, he said that, I understand all the good that governments do and everything like that. And he said, I find I love nations and people, but I kind of hate governments. And the bureaucracies, and I've been in now the bureaucracy myself throughout my lifetime. So, these things governments are there for a purpose, but at the same time, the commonality is with the people. And it's always difficult. That's why politics is a very important thing, and it's a true art form to try and find one's way through the complexity of life, and among our nation, other nations, and everything.
And you tell us about John Steinbeck and what you did in your situation to portray.
Well, with Steinbeck, it actually, I have 51 years of thought behind this before I did it.
Wow.
And in the fall of 1967, I was 21 years old, and I was visiting with Eric Hoffer. And Hoffer asked me if I had read Travels with Charlie by Steinbeck, and I had. So I said, yes, I did, Mr. Hoffer. He said, what did you think? And he had a German accent, Hoffer did. And I said, well, I enjoyed it, Mr. Hoffer. I learned some things. I said, what about you? And he was a little disappointed in Travels with Charlie. And I said, well, why? And he said he didn't see the substance he was hoping to get out of Steinbeck, which was perceived as his last book. So that thought was in the back of my head all these years, but Steinbeck did a last little book, which was hardly read by anybody, called American Americans. In fact, they made a little coffee table book out of it. But the subtitle of Travels with Charlie, which was nonfiction, was In Search of America. So his effort, his last little book, which was hardly read by anybody, called American Americans, and I consulted with Susan Shillinglaw, one of the top scholars on Steinbeck. She was director of the Steinbeck Center for a while, as well as the Steinbeck Center at San Jose State. And I asked her if it was fair to say this was Steinbeck's effort to be like Tocqueville, to try and draw some views and conclusions about our American Americans, and Tocqueville was French, obviously. And she agreed with that. So this was sort of the birth of the thing, and I referenced that it was a view I had, like Hoffer, who had been a hobo and a migrant farm worker before he ever worked on the waterfront, that he attempted to understand America as much, if not more, from the bottom up than the top down, not from Harvard and Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, but from the bottom up, and she agreed with that too. Steinbeck was similar. So this came together when I first performed as Steinbeck. I've done it 5 times now. I did 2 recent performances at the Firehouse Theater, and they were surprisingly well received. But there's 50 years of thought about this, and it goes back, I think, a little bit to what you're talking about, is how you find understanding and commonality with people. And so this is something now I may do a performance down at the Steinbeck Center. I met with them down there, and may lead to some performances back east. You never know.
Yep.
I do a side career at age 73.
Do you look a little like Steinbeck in some way?
Well, not really, but I grew this goatee to try and look a little bit like him. He also had a mustache. I'm terrible with growing a mustache.
Yeah.
His hair remained more dark. Mine's white.
Yeah.
So but I try, and the main thing is to try and understand Steinbeck himself and be in character.
Yeah.
And when I've been asked is, when you do it, are you feel like you're Tom portraying Steinbeck, or do you feel like you're Steinbeck? And I definitely feel I'm Steinbeck, and I wouldn't do it if I didn't feel there was integrity.
Really,
and make sure that I have a check and balance. When I look out the audience, I think if Steinbeck was sitting out there, and it's more of an interpretation than an impersonation, I portray Steinbeck, but it's my interpretation of Steinbeck coming back to life.
Yeah.
And if Steinbeck was sitting out there, would he shake his head and say, no, I wouldn't say that? Or would he say, yeah, I'd probably say that?
Yeah.
So that's my check and balance, is to have integrity, because it's an interpretation of Steinbeck as much as it is an impersonation. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
And Steinbeck's more relevant now in a lot of ways than ever. That's the discovery that's been made. He's become, he's actually being reread, and I find when I do this performance, is people say, I've got to go buy these books, and I've got to reread Steinbeck, or I've got to read Travels with Charlie or American American. So he's actually as relevant today as he was when he originally wrote in the 30s and 40s and 50s.
He did, yeah. Well, I'm rowing that way too, yeah. I want to meet more Steinbeck, 'cause I love reading, and one of the things I do is I read back to different authors and so forth. And way back I did read Steinbeck, but I couldn't quote stuff that you do.
Well, I focus more on his nonfiction than his fiction, although I'm starting to move into the fiction.
Okay.
And Steinbeck the person, and his attempt, and I found out, like with Grapes of Wrath, I'm going to do a performance in a small bookstore in San Francisco in April, that he did a series of 7 short articles for a newspaper long gone now called the San Francisco News in about 1935. That was the premise for what became the Grapes of Wrath.
Oh, okay.
And those 7 short articles were beautifully written. They were not only journalistic, but they were interpretive, they were historical, and with good language. So I better understand now how the Grapes of Wrath was birthed out of these writings, and the depth of Steinbeck's thinking. And so it's great to bring him back to life, because he deserves to come back to life.
Yeah, yeah, and for sure, I want to stay in touch with you. Maybe we can get. Are they going to film the stuff you're going to be doing?
Well, they did film the evening performance out at the Firehouse Theater. I haven't seen it yet, and I'm kind of afraid to look at myself. I can't imagine what I look like when I'm performing.
Who that guy? Who?
Yeah. But they have filmed. I haven't seen it yet, and, so we'll see from there. But I'm uncomfortable with the idea of looking at myself. I can't quite see myself up on the stage, but it's been working out pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I can see you there because you're more natural, you know. You're not pretending so much. Actors have to act, you know, oftentimes.
And what I do actually, and this goes back to Barbara Murdy's in Chabot College, through Speech 1A and then I took a Speech 2A, Oral Interpretation. So, and Tom Hanks, I believe, took a class from Barbara too, and he went to Chabot College.
Yeah.
And he referenced that one time, and she gave me the self-confidence to get up there. When I do it, it's conversationalistic. I have another person there, but I have no rehearsed lines. I have a pathway, and I know where we're going to go. But everything that we talk is extemporaneous, but
Comes
knowing
out
the
more
path.
natural anyway. Then.
Yeah, but if it was rehearsed and I had memorized lines,
Yeah.
I don't think it would appear appropriate. So it's all extemporaneous.
Yeah, yeah.
And it works out better that way. Some people say, how can you get up there with no memorized lines? I say, well, I have confidence in the subject.
Yeah.
And that's confidence in what I'm trying to do. So.
Yeah, and this is the way when I talked to you, you know, you were thinking, what's this guy? Wait a minute, he's got to plan more ahead to do this. And I kind of sensed that, and I understood, of course, you know. But having heard you before and heard about you before, I says, this will be great. And you have enlightened us in a lot of different things, which is great.
Well, and I can't say enough about Chabot College and community colleges around the country.
Yeah.
Community colleges are one of the greatest assets this country has. We know that Harvard's great and Stanford and Berkeley and all those places. But boy, the community colleges have been one of the greatest things ever to happen in this country. As far as
you get a start there, you know, without...
It helped a lot of people like myself get our lives together and go on and have good lives. And they're just a tremendous national resource for this country.
Yeah, and I have loved teaching here when I had my tutorial center and what have you, you know, and doing different things. I was able, thank goodness, to be creative myself. You know, I do my own charts and color and all this other stuff that I like doing. And Chabot appreciated that, you know, that it was coming out.
Well, I'm sure, and more importantly, the students appreciated it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I loved working with my students because a lot of times, you know, when they were tutoring, they'd go to different schools and meet with different people and teachers and so forth, you know, and then tutor each other. I had English, math tutors helping each other right here and there, you know, so.
Oh, you're one of those many people that have helped so many people like myself get our lives together and go on and have good lives.
Yeah.
So I thank you for your service too.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you came on with us here. I appreciate that very much. And Barbara Murdy, you know, is one of my fellow teachers, and you talk highly about her. And
well, when they dedicated the Performing Arts Center, they asked me if I would be one of the two main speakers with Congressman Garamendi.
Okay.
And I forget sitting there with Congressman Garamendi, and I kept looking over at Dave and Barbara Murdy. This goes back 6, 7, 8 years ago, probably 8, 9, 10 years ago now. I kept looking at the two of them, Barbara in particular, and I thought, what would my life have been like without her? And I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I actually fought back the tears before I went up to speak to think how much that lady did to gift me with my life.
Wow.
So as long as I live, I will always be very grateful to Barbara Murdy's #1, Chabot College #2.
Yeah, right on target. Well, we're going to finish up here in a couple of seconds, but I really want to thank you for being here. You know, kind of a spontaneous type of thing, but then I like that too, you know.
Me too.
You're the man of the hour in that respect.
Half hour.
Half hour anyway, so that has been great. Now, I hope that my program here has influenced you, a lot of people, in thinking about different things. I know the last speaker I had was on diets, and boy, they loved what he had talked about, you know, realistic and so forth. And you're the man of the hour too here in terms of spontaneity, you know. You would like, well, what are we going to do here and there? But
well, you're a good interview. You help run it very well.
Thank you.
You bring out the best in your guest.
I hope. Yeah. Well, I want to say adios, folks, and thank you for being with us. And we'll see you again next week on Flying Way, 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 Way High. All right. Adios.